This is Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. An informal chats with top business moguls as they share their stories of failure and success in a fun and relaxed way. Get entertained, educated, and unlock the secrets to success.
Welcome to Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman. I have another wonderful friend and guest, Sam. Sam, pronounce your last name for me.
Thevanayagam.
Okay, I am so not good at getting those pronunciations right. So you're the founder and CEO of Parts Life. We've had a few conversations talking about your journey in business and what you've done from your personal life perspective. You're focused on workforce development. You have a workforce development program inside of your organization, but you have just an amazing career and life story. And I read about how when you got started in business, you moved to a smaller home, if I remember correctly, and then use the funds to start and acquire your first business. But tell me what your business is. What do you do?
So the name of my company is Parts Life Inc., which I bootstrapped in 2007. And then since then, I bought a couple of other companies, Deval Life Cycle and LC Engineers. And all three companies are focused on working with the DoD. We are a defense contractor, a small to medium defense contractor, and all of our work is focused on increasing our customers' expensive and mission-critical assets. So increasing the life of those assets.
That's amazing. How did you find that industry? What were you doing before you decided to bootstrap your own company?
Yeah, so I spent 12 years in the automotive aftermarket.
Okay.
And so, I learned a lot in the automotive aftermarket, understanding when cars come out of warranty. It's very interesting, Ronnie, that in America, right, a car is a necessity. It's not a luxury. Right. If you think about it, because your car is so associated with your ability to support your family, and so in the automotive aftermarket, provides a more inexpensive way for somebody who has a used car, has a 7, 8, 10-year-old car, is able to provide you quality parts, but that you need in order to keep your car working so that you can actually get to work. And so I learned what I learned in the automotive aftermarket. And then eventually when I started Parts Life, interesting story, I started Parts Life in 2007 thinking I was going to actually work in the automotive aftermarket.
Okay.
But if you remember, 2007 and 8 were very difficult years in this nation. If I went back and read recently, the presidents of Ford, GM, and Chrysler were with begging bowls in Washington, D.C., getting bailouts and handouts as a way to be able to continue to keep those companies going. So a difficult time to get any traction in the automotive industry. And so I pivoted away from automotive into the defense space, recognized that the defense industry needed a lot of help, high mix, low volume product that they were having a real difficult time in being able to find. And so I created, I heard somebody say that riches are in the niches. And so I was able to find this area that it wasn't very well defined. I helped define that space. And so if you think about it, even with God, right? God actually gave me the name of the company long before he gave me the problem to solve. So think about that name, Parts Life.
Right.
It really stands for what it is that we do. We are able to find a solution for the life of that asset by providing you the parts and components that you need in order to be able to extend the life of that asset.
So I want to get more into that detail on extending the life of that asset, but I had a great conversation with a friend of mine some years ago that worked in the auto aftermarket life, and I worked at a company that was a distributor of auto parts. But he and I had an interesting conversation, and you would remember this. Back in the day when cars came out, they would put in just a bland stereo in the car. And so there was a huge industry around putting in nice stereo systems and speaker systems. And then I think the automakers figured out that they needed to put better systems. And so they started doing it at the original manufacturing process. But so his business changed, and this was decades ago. But it is interesting how that auto aftermarket has changed. But you were dealing with, your plan was to deal with more specific, probably not auto systems, but other products, right? I presume?
Yeah. So, yes. So you're talking about you're talking about more of the accessories.
Correct.
When you're talking about stereo systems and stuff like that. So if you think about it, once the Japanese started to make a quality car, the Americans also had to follow suit. And today, cars are so much better made today than they ever have been, Right. And so, yeah, but the parts that I'm talking about were parts that are like brake calipers, master cylinders, steering systems, wiper motors, electronic control computers.
Precision parts.
Well, all of those parts that are needed, some that are replaced more than others. But yet, I'm talking about, when I said I worked in the automotive aftermarket, it was a replacement parts market, right? And so when you needed a wiper motor, or you needed a window lift, or you needed a master cylinder or a brake caliper, the company that I used to work for created a great option, a great quality option, rather than going back to the dealer. So we actually sold through distribution. So things like Napa, CarQuest, AutoZone Advance, right, were all companies that bought from us and sold it to either a do-it-yourselfer, right, or sold it to three-step distribution. So I learned all about that. I had some very difficult jobs there. I was constantly the guy that was moving from place to place that were difficult, constrained areas in the organization. But that's how God prepared me to do what I do today.
Right. Yeah, and you're right. Those precision parts are just incredible because I worked at NASA and some other manufacturing. I worked at Canon, and the precisions that you have to meet on those parts are important.
Yep. So some of them can be measured in human hands, right? And so we have today, Parts Life has measuring equipment that is able to get to that level of detail as a way to be, we can get that precise as a way to be able to get the measurements we need in order to create the drawings that are required in order to recreate those parts. So in many cases, Ronnie, our business, we're not making something brand new in the sense that our designs are not new designs. These are actually older designs that don't necessarily have the technical data packages. Either the prime contractors don't have it or the tier ones don't have it. And so we have to recreate those technical data packages and then be able to go out and make those parts that are required for these expensive and mission critical assets. So we have a direct correlation between our work and the fleet readiness, right, of all of the fleet. So whether it's a Navy fleet, a Air Force fleet, an Army fleet, a Marine Corps fleet, a Space Force fleet, there is direct correlation between the work that we do and their ability to be able to function.
Right. And Sam, I want to get back to what you're producing today, but you thought you would be in the auto aftermarket producing those parts. And real quick on that, what's fascinating to me is after a certain number of years, automakers are no longer required to produce certain parts for repairs, aftermarket repairs. And a lot of options that people have, or the only option in some cases, is going to junkyards or auto recycling facilities to find parts in old cars that they can use for replacement, right? So it sounds like the same is the case on your defense side and what you're doing, that you still need those parts and you've become a specialist in that market. But before we talk about those items, you're right. 2007 it's interesting you mentioned 2007. I worked in the housing industry during that period of time. And by January of 2007, we were already reacting to a very difficult market. So this is well before 2008 and Lehman Brothers going out of business. It was a really, really tough time back then. So what's cool and neat about your story is that you've pivoted from auto aftermarket related work to defense. And changing complete industries like that, I'm sure, is really difficult, but you made it work.
Well, I made it work over a period of time. I have to tell you, it was a very difficult time, a very scary time. Because at that time, my wife and I are blessed with 5 children, and at that time, we had 4 children already, and so we had, so many mouths to feed, so many people depending on me as the breadwinner. Very difficult time. But, with God's grace and His help, I was able to get through that period. Of course, I had a supportive wife. But it wasn't an easy time, and I don't want to sugarcoat it to the people who are listening to me. Entrepreneurship, is not something that is easy to do. It's difficult to do. You have to be resilient. You have to be able to pivot. You have to be able to come back from failure after failure after failure. And these were difficult times, but all I did was hang in there.
Right.
I had faith in God first, and then faith in my own abilities. I knew that God had prepared me, and God had equipped me, with some talents and abilities and gifts, but also some failures and mistakes that I had made over the years that were all woven together in a way that I knew eventually that I would be successful.
So, Sam, tell the story, though, if you don't mind, about moving out of your home and using that capital to start your business in 2007. One, it was just a tough time, but you moved out of your home because you were determined to start this business. Tell us the story.
So my wife, who was part of that decision, she knew that I had always had this itch to scratch about working for myself. And when I said to her, this was the time for me to do it, she said, we can do that, but we're not going to be able to do that living in this big home. I believe that we need to be able to downsize as a way to do that. And that took me a while to get used to because we had built this home and it was comfortable. We thought that it was everything we wanted. And so to actually sell and downsize was not something that I wanted to do, but I eventually did it. I think I was wise to listen to my wife and do that. And so what I did was we sold our home. We downsized into a smaller home, which enabled me to take some equity out of that business when I did that. And the amazing thing is God actually protected that equity, because if we had waited till 2008, we would have had no equity in the home. So that was one of the 2 things that enabled me to be able to do that. And that was selling the home, putting the equity into the business to live, if you will, because, I had 3 sons playing Pop Warner football. So things like, medical insurance was very, very important. We couldn't have our children hurt and not have medical insurance. So many times we actually paid our medical insurance before we paid our mortgage, just to make sure that we had the insurance in case, one of our sons got hurt.
And that's an interesting lesson there. I think just the piece that you spoke about, the insurance side, but also your willingness to make a sacrifice. Because so many people, they get into their home, they have a good income, they're not willing to step out, get rid of the home and start a business. It's a huge sacrifice. They enjoy the comfort of having their home. They were keeping up with everybody in their neighborhood and all of their friends, and they weren't willing to make that sacrifice, and you did.
Yep. Looking back, it looked like there was a lot of wisdom there, but, it was just God's grace at that point.
Right. And I'm sure you were terrified because when you've got, like you said, when you have kids, 4 kids to feed and insurance and their activities, you don't want to sacrifice. My daughter was really young at that time as well, in that era, when the housing crisis took place. And I saw 10,000 people laid off at my organization. And it was scary for us as well, being in that industry. And my daughter was a gymnast, so she was pretty active. She was in a segment that she could get injured at any time. And you find a way to make it happen and make it work out. So you transition into the defense. How long did it take you from the point that you started the business and pivoted from auto to feeling like you had a good business that was going to work?
So I would, so it took about 3 years for things to turn around from the time I started. Okay. But I think it took about a year for me to recognize that the automotive business was completely dead and that I needed to do something else. And then it took, 18 months to 2 years for me to actually find my feet in the defense space. So it's very interesting that the Defense Department needs a lot of parts, the defense industrial base is less now than it was 4 years ago. And we are in trouble as far as keeping pace with China and its ability to make the submarines and the ships and stuff like that. But yet the DoD is one of the most difficult organizations to do work with. It's very difficult to get into the defense space. And so even today, there's a lot of companies, there are a lot of trade associations, there are a lot of agencies that are trying to figure out a way to simplify the acquisition process.
Right.
But it's a very difficult process to get into. And even today, I would say that it takes 18 months to 2 years from the time you have an idea to actually get that to be able to work. So it's interesting, Ronnie, that today I'm actually working a year from now or 2 years from now, right? So
right, that makes sense.
Next year's work's already spoken for. I have already showed the capacity that I have for next year. I'm actually working in some cases for 2 years from now. And we are in the process of increasing our capacities as we speak. I just bought a 40,000 square foot facility to expand into in Philadelphia. I'm in the process of negotiating 18 to 20,000 square foot facility in southern New Jersey to grow into Parts Life. So, we are doing a lot to try to expand, to expand, but I recognize that, doing business with the DoD is not easy business, and it takes a long time to be able to get to success.
Right. Now, if you don't mind, walk us through what that looks like, because you don't just start selling into DoD. You have to become a qualified vendor. You have to compete in the process to win the contract. Right. So walk us through what that looks like for someone that is trying to get in to do work with the DoD. Right.
So for me, fortunately, I was able to supply somebody that was already supplying the DoD.
Okay. So you were a subcontractor start.
So I started off by being a subcontractor, and we continue to be a subcontractor in that portion of the business. But that gave me a start. It gave me an ability to find my feet, if you will. And then I did such a good job, I was able to continue to grow that. And in the meantime, I had some of my own ideas. I knew that I wanted to work with the DoD directly. And so over a period of time, I was able to build the relationships. I was able to get the access that I needed. I was able to get the face time that I needed to be able to talk to customers and to be able to let them know, hey, here's what I can do for you, be able to empathize with the things that they were dealing with. So all of these things took time, but by God's grace, I was able to create that success.
Now, so as I mentioned, I worked in manufacturing at Canon, and then I worked at NASA. And it's really neat to see the manufacturing of a product and where it's utilized and how it's utilized. I've built semi-clean rooms. I think we had that in our conversation. But you actually completely manufacture your products here in the U.S., correct?
That is correct. Yes. So we are a turnkey manufacturer right here in Philadelphia. So I'm talking to you from our facility in Philadelphia, where we have a machine shop, a fabrication shop, a weld shop, a machine shop. And so we do all of the manufacturing here. There are a few things that we have to send outside for, but by and large, we do everything here. And it's great because, you in order to do manufacturing, especially the type of manufacturing that we do is high mix, low volume. And so we need good people, we need a very strong workforce. And so a big part of why I am so focused on workforce development is for a very selfish reason, right? Because I need good people, but then thereafter, it also makes good sense,
right?
Because, I have recognized that workforce is a great way. Focusing on workforce and training and development of people is a great way to be able to create a transformation, right? Because I am in the middle of being able to transform lives because of the type of work that we do.
Right.
And so
You mentioned something that is actually very interesting. So for a lot of the listeners that might not have caught it, you mentioned that from a product perspective, you're high mix and low volume. And having worked in supply chain and manufacturing, volume is key for us to maximize our revenue. So if you built a die and you're producing something, to be able to produce a lot of those widgets using that same die is so critical. But you're high mix, meaning you have a lot of SKUs and low volume per SKU. Walk the listener through what that means. It's a complicated business when you have high volume and high mix and low volume.
Yeah, because if you think about the assets of the Department of Defense, right? If you think about how many aircraft carriers we have, we probably have 12 aircraft carriers, right? So if you're making something for the deck of an aircraft carrier, there's only 12 opportunities for you to be able to do that, right? And so we're not talking about in the automotive aftermarket, you're making thousands of parts. You're making hundreds of thousands of parts.
Right.
You don't get to do that in the Department of Defense. These are much smaller volumes, much more complicated parts. And high mix, low volume is not something everybody is set up to do. In fact, I would argue that most financial leaders, CFOs wouldn't allow companies, especially public companies and private equity companies to have come even close to the type of work that we're doing.
Right.
But the fact that, I have been able to figure out a way to be able to build that business. So, we play, I have a big vision, but I play small ball, right? Meaning I do the next thing right. I do the little things right, and I do the next thing right.
Right.
And so by getting a lot of singles, right, we are able to create success. So there is not a lot of home runs that we hit in the type of game that we play. We play a small ball, and we have learned to play it well. And then I have a culture that supports that, right? And so we have created a culture that is able to focus on those little things, get those little things right. And by doing that, we have created a formidable business that the DoD depends on today.
Now, in our next program, I want to talk more about your culture, but you mentioned something I think is critical. I coached my company team softball, and we played in a number of tournaments. And a lot of teams that played in these tournaments, they had tryouts and they were trying to select the top player who could hit a lot of home runs, these big old burly guys. And it was very competitive. My philosophy was different. I picked people that wanted to be on the team that I knew were just good people, and I placed them in the right position. And what was fascinating, we weren't home run hitters, not even close, but we were really good at playing consistent, hitting good base runs, and then running the base as well. And in these competitions, we won every year. We didn't hit home runs. I don't know if we even hit one home run, but we were really good at hitting solid singles and doubles, and we won these games by large margins. And you're right, if you execute really, really well, and you give people the right environment to execute, it's amazing what you can deliver.
Absolutely. And so I have a personal mission statement, and my personal mission statement is to create an environment where others can achieve their God-given potential.
I love it.
Right? And if you think about it, purpose and potential is God's responsibility. When He created us, He created us in His own image, and He put purpose and potential within us.
Right.
So I had no business in purpose and potential, but suddenly I have a business and I have ownership and I have stewardship in creating an environment in order for those people to thrive, in order for those people to be planted and to be able to grow and blossom into everything that God wants them to be.
Right.
And so that is very important to me, and it's in the very core of the work that I do.
Right. So Sam, if you don't mind, let's backtrack just a little. You were born in a different country and immigrated to the United States. Walk us through that journey.
Yeah, so I was born as the oldest son to my parents, and we were Christians, and we were part of a minority in Sri Lanka. My father was a honest army officer. My mother was a school teacher, and so they were both very much in service. Profit was a bad word in our home, so it was all about service. It was all about being generous and God-fearing and sense of duty. Hard work, certainly entrepreneurship had no place in my home. So entrepreneurship is something that I had to learn to do myself. And I got to do that when I went to work at 18 years old. But then I grew up with a lot of love. I grew up with a lot of unconditional love. My father, was somebody that was very focused on sports, and my mother was an athlete as well. My mother was a hurdler. My father was a hurdler. My father was also a cricket player. So growing up, we played a lot of cricket, and he taught me life through, I guess, the game of cricket. And in fact, I wrote a book called The First 10 Runs in Singles that actually memorializes my father. But at 18, I was, not going to school as much, very, very, almost a high school dropout. And so my father said, stop wasting your time and my money. And he sent me to work. And I went to work for a friend of his at a very leading company. It was a leading broker. They were not only brokering financial services, but brokering commodities. And I went to work as a commodity broker. And I worked there for 4 years. I got very good at being a broker. And during that time, I was introduced to business, and I started to learn about business, and I became good at it. And then I went to night school, and I got a diploma in business over a period of a year.
In Sri Lanka.
In Sri Lanka, absolutely loved it. And then I had a curiosity and a desire to study and finish and get a degree, but my parents didn't have any money to send me overseas, and so I prayed, and God opened the door for me to come and live with a family in Michigan for a year. I was supposed to live there 2 years, but I lived with them for a year, went to a community college. I was able to transfer my diploma credits over, so I was able to graduate within a year with an associate degree in business, which I then parlayed into Oral Roberts University. Wow. And so I went to RU and got a degree in marketing at Oral Roberts University, learned how to hear God's voice. And, really it was a great experience. It was a transformational experience. And then when I graduated with a degree in marketing, I ended up going to work for this company in Philadelphia. So the big break in this country was when they hired me to work in this company in Philadelphia, a company called Cardone Industries, family-owned business. Went to work for them, and they gave me a lot of opportunity, taught me a lot, took me around, and so learned a lot. I learned my trade in the automotive business, working for that company.
That's incredible. So why the U.S.? So you're in Sri Lanka. You weren't doing well at the end of your high school career. Your dad sent you to work with a friend of his. Why did you decide the U.S. and Michigan made sense for you?
So my father had actually gone to military school in England, and my second brother actually went before me and went to school in England. I had no desire to go to England. Some or other, there was this bee in my bonnet that I wanted to come to the U.S. to study, and I just loved the American dream, the American people. Wow. Just I think the American confidence. I grew up a confident young person, and I just desired, that type of air, if you will.
That's amazing. Yeah, so many great stories just there and lessons for young people that if you put your mind to it, right? Even if in your case, high school maybe wasn't the right. I spoke to a business owner the other day, and this young man dropped out of high school a couple of weeks before graduation, ended up going into the military, which kind of saved his career in life and gave him something to focus on, and ended up getting several degrees. And after retiring out of the military, he's running a business that's over $100 million in annual revenue that he founded. That is an incredible story, and your journey is just amazing, but so many wonderful lessons.
So, yep, and my brother, my younger brother, just became an American citizen this last week. Wow. And I went to the swearing-in ceremony, and it was a very solemn occasion because, many of us don't recognize what it means to be an American. Right. many times during that course of that swearing in ceremony, I was brought to tears because it's almost like a religious experience,
Right.
Because, what it means to be an American, I think a lot of people who are born here don't necessarily recognize what it is that we have.
It is. I absolutely agree with you. Sometimes it's easy to take it for granted. And when I speak to some young people, I mention it from this perspective. I lived in an area near Disney, and I was very close. And for a long time, I'd never been. It was in the backyard, and I guess I kind of took it for granted. And sometimes you just don't know what is normal to you. Like it's there, but you kind of take it for granted. So
Yep.
You're absolutely right. So if you had to leave any business decoded tips for our listening audience, what would be your 1 or 2 tips, Sam?
So, are you specifically talking about business, or are you talking about entrepreneurship?
About business and life. Like what would you tell them just to keep them inspired? Because you've had, we're at the end of this specific program, but going from one country to another, realizing that you needed to kind of focus, that transition when you moved out of your home to use the equity to start your business, and then realizing that could have not been a good idea because the market changed on you as well. Like there's so many critical points in your life that chose you to go either left or right, and it's worked out for you. But those were hard decisions, trying to decide between other bills and paying for health insurance so your kids would be covered if they were injured while playing sports. Those are just hard life decisions, and you made good ones.
Yeah. So thank you for clarifying that. I would say 2 things. Number 1, resilience is important.
Yes.
Right. So when I speak publicly, I talk about rubber. Rubber has something called short-term memory. If you press a rubber ball in, it has the ability to come back.
Right.
The scientific term for that is rebound resilience.
Right.
Another way to say that is short-term memory, right? We need short-term memory. We need to be able to come right back. We need to be like a cat, right? A cat, when it jumps or when it falls, it knows how to they know how to find their feet, and they're ready to make the next move, right? And that's a great word picture of resilience and being able to be resilient. But I would also say, it's important for us to recognize that God gives us grace, right? He gives us grace to go through the things that He puts us through. And it's just important to look and understand that we have grace and that He has created us for a purpose.
Right.
Ephesians 2:10 is my favorite scripture, which says we are God's workmanship created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which He has prepared in advance for us to do. So from the foundations of the earth, He has already prepared a work for us to do.
Right.
Right. And so it's important for us to find that work. And sometimes finding that work, finding what is important is not easy, right? It's difficult. It's uncomfortable, right? It means that you have to struggle. You might have to suffer some. Sri Lanka, one of the things that Sri Lanka is known for is gems. We have some of the best blue sapphires, the best rubies in the world, right? And I've actually been to a gem mine.
Okay.
It's a very difficult work, right? The gems are not sitting on the surface for you to find.
Right.
You have to mine it. There's a lot of water. There's a lot of moisture. You're doing difficult work. You're doing difficult, dangerous work.
Right.
To find those precious stones.
To find a gem.
Yeah. That when you see it on a necklace or you see it on an earring, it's incredibly beautiful. Right.
It's amazing.
So some of this work is not easy, right? And so we need to be able to be ready to strap up and to be able to go to work.
That's amazing. Sam, on the next program, I want to talk about your workforce development program, your concept of law of generosity, because you've integrated that into your family. And then recently, your work in helping the communities impacted by the hurricane. And we'll discuss that on the next program. But Sam, thank you so very much for joining me in this episode of Business Decoded.
Thank you. Thank you, Ronnie. Good being with you.
Thanks for joining us on Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman.
Thank you for listening to Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. Please be sure to subscribe and share, and stay tuned for more incredible Business Decoded episodes.